Thank you for waiting patiently. I know many people have been excited about this, but here it is, part 2 of my interview with Josh Williams about the best Facebook posters and Facebook's amazing product and engineering culture. If you like this, then I've got some good news. You'd have heard Josh and I talk about a guy called VJ Raji several times in the first video, and I think in the second one too. Good news. He signed up to come and do a show with me here in Studio Z. So make sure you subscribe and get the notifications so that you know when that video drops. And he's my favorite engineering leader I've ever worked for. So I'm really, really excited about some of the nuggets of wisdom he's going to share with us here. Anyway, without further ado, let's get you back on and let's take a look at poster number 5. Totally. Okay, so this is onto Josh's top 5 selection of posters now. So in our countdown, we're at 5.
Yeah,
going towards the best one.
All right.
And this is a bit of a legendary poster. Yeah. So this journey is 1% finished.
Yeah. So this was kind of like part of the early Facebook ethos, and it is interesting because I do think that this poster became less relevant over time. But it was or maybe less. Maybe approachable is the right word, or like easy to understand. You know, early on, Facebook was large, but it was also growing like a rocket ship. And if you drew the pie chart, which is by far the worst chart, and so you never should, but what is easy to visualize, if you drew the pie chart of like the addressable market and Facebook's like percentage of it, Facebook, even with millions and millions of users, was a tiny sliver of the pie.
Yeah.
And so, there was this notion that was like all throughout Facebook culture, which was, we're 1% finished. There's still so much more to do. It looks like a finished product, but there's so much more to do. There's this overflowing well of things that could be done with this product, of places to bring the product. There was a long time when we were trying to bring faster internet to parts of the world in order to, among other things, enable all the benefits of the internet, but also the ability to access Facebook. And it was funny because I feel like in some ways this poster also lived out within the built environment.
Yeah.
In the sense that the Facebook ethos in buildings was plywood walls and unfinished ceilings.
Yeah.
And in fact, like when we moved into the Dexter building in Seattle back in 2015, I think it was, we actually ripped out. It was a done new building waiting for a tenant. And we took over the whole building and gutted it and brought in the same guy who did MPK 20, which is one of the giant buildings down in California. And they punched holes in the floor to put giant staircases through 4 floors, and they gutted all the ceilings so you could see the pipes, and they put up a bunch of plywood all over the place, and it felt like the Facebook offices in California. You can say, wow, what a waste. But man, the ethos of being in that space felt like 1% done. It felt like Facebook. Yeah. It felt like the vibe.
Yeah, I think this is actually Stripe had some similar saying about because they were doing so well, they were so successful. Patrick was afraid that people would think it was, we've done, we've achieved, we've won. And that's a dangerous thing for a company to ever think. It's got to think it's still struggling. It's got to, you're in a much better mindset if you have a bit of fear and competitive agony. And I think, it's one of the things this was trying to say, right? It's like, we're only 1% of the way there, guys.
Yeah, we got so much more to do. Yeah. But Amazon has the same thing, right?
What's theirs?
Day one.
Oh, right. Yeah, this is day one. Yeah.
This is day one. Every day is day one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, maybe most giant successful companies have some version of this in their DNA that allows them to keep on going despite success.
Or they have to find it again if they lose it, I think.
It's really easy to sit on your laurels once you have great success.
Yeah, I feel a little bit that might have happened a bit at Microsoft with Satya coming back in. You really reinvigorated people to feel like there was a lot more ahead, and they weren't just the incumbent, being an example of a bit of a transition like that. Okay, so on to our
number
next...
4?
No, number 4 in our rundown. And this is definitely one of my favorites. Actually, I'm going to show on screen now a picture of a good friend of mine, I think you know Monica Sang.
Oh, yeah.
Posing in front of this because nobody embodied this poster like Monica for me. And the poster says, nothing at Facebook is somebody else's problem. And I love this poster.
I love that poster.
And it's something we talk about at Zuplo, and I really want to be part of our culture. So go on, Josh, take it away. What's this poster all about?
I mean, so it's interesting because you opened the whole conversation about talking about Facebook's engineering culture, and then I've been talking about just the general culture, which is obviously part of the engineering culture. But to me, when I think about this, I think about the engineering culture, and one of the things I think about is, Facebook is kind of famous for having a mono repo, which is almost true, but mostly a giant mono repo that most of Facebook and various other parts of the company run out of. And Facebook went to great lengths to make it really easy for any engineer in the company to change pretty much any part of Facebook. And not only did they go to great lengths to make it easy to do, but they encouraged it. And there was like this really strong encouragement of the notion that if you saw something broken, you should go fix it. And in fact, you should just go fix it right now, especially if it's easy. Don't file a task. Don't go post in a group. Send out a diff. I have it's slightly different, but I have this poster that I stole at one point and put on my wall in my office that is a Facebook poster. It's not one of my favorites, but it says the best way to give feedback is to make things. But also, we used to joke the best form of feedback is a diff, right? And so I really think that in general, Facebook asked us all to say, if you saw something that you didn't think was right, you should go try to do something about it. Whether that is go change the code, and then you might actually send it out and encounter the people who were experienced in that code giving you feedback that maybe you didn't understand something or whatever, and you should change it. Or frequently it was a thank you, thanks for sending this out, ship it with a macro, because we were big into GIFs and memes. But also just in general, if you thought something culturally was wrong, there was this group at Facebook that, for the life of me now I can't remember the name of the group. It was Facebook. The company is broken. They eventually changed the name of it. There was a time when all the groups, it became a little contentious to have contentious group names, and it changed into some other name. But for a long time, it was called, something at Facebook is broken, and it was about cultural issues at Facebook. And like I mentioned earlier, Facebook ran on Facebook, right? So we actually, early on when I joined, we didn't have this thing called Workplace that we have now and Work Chat, and so you would literally have a Facebook feed open at all times, and it would intersperse sevs and diffs to review and user research with baby pictures and vacation and stuff, and it was so bad for work-life separation that at some point they went and built a beach mode that you could put your account in that would erase all the work stuff. So you could actually go to Hawaii and not have to see a bunch of work stuff.
I forgot about beach mode.
But then eventually we switched over to this thing we call Workplace, which is basically a true separation of accounts. But it's still the same idea. It's groups. It's comments.
I miss it.
It's a very verbose culture combined with a very transparent culture, which meant that you were invited to and discuss and debate almost anything, and some of the debates became quite famous. Anyway.
Definitely one of my favorite posters. And I think sometimes it means as little as in a small team, when you see folks creating a linear we use for tracking bugs, to assign a bug to someone else that they could just tackle themselves. But the mantra is, I don't own that code. That's not mine. That, absolutely was unacceptable at Facebook. Sometimes you're not the best person to do a particular thing, and that was understood. But there was little tolerance for the idea of particular code ownership by an individual and so on. So, but it went mega. It went across the whole culture, not just engineering, as well as you said. Okay, next one. This is great. Done is better. This is number 3.
Yeah.
Done is better than perfect. Take us through why you picked this one, what it means.
So I think this is just a notion that to me has been strong long before I worked at Facebook.
Yep.
But I'm a big believer in good enough. But good enough in a noble way, which I guess speaks to, we talked a little about it earlier, too.
Be scrappy, yeah.
The be scrappy, but I'm a firm, and I'm an engineer, so I'm a firm believer in good enough, which the hard part about good enough is not actually it's the good, it's the enough. And what I mean by that, it's figuring out what enough is. Sometimes figuring out what enough is really, really hard. And there are times when perfect is enough because you can't figure out what enough is. Yeah. And so you're there is no other option. You just need to make sure this thing works, and it works right every time. But you know what? Most things are not that clear cut.
Yeah.
Either it's not actually even clear cut what right is.
Yeah.
Many things fall into that category where there's actually a spectrum of quote unquote correctness. But you talk to 10 people and you get like 10 different, the spectrum's kind of tilted in 10 different ways. Or a lot of times it's like, yeah, you could go spend 10 times the energy to do it like all the way to perfect. And there is like truly a notion of perfect. It's there. But you've spent 10 times the energy to do it all the way to perfect. And the actual ramifications of that in the real world, the actual impact that's realized, whether or not any users even noticed that you did that work is just non-existent. And so this was trying to get across the notion that, in fact, done is better than perfect. You get something that's actually done, ship it out into the world. If you spend 10 times the amount of time working on it, there's a pretty good chance that somewhere along the line you're going to stop.
Yeah.
And when you stop, well, then it never gets done. And so, you have this thing that aspired to perfection, but aspiring to perfection or having something good that's in your hand and working, which one of those would you take?
Yeah.
I would take the thing that's in my hand that's good and working every time.
It's also where improvement starts. So I think about this, you can think about it in the macro in terms of like how do you approach like creating an MVP, for example, but you can also think about it in the micro. So I think about this all the time now. When I'm writing an email to someone and I'm dreading pressing the send button.
Sure.
For some reason it's going to someone really important, it feels high stakes. And I try and get focused and like, go, how can I just close this out quickly? Make sure I'm not making a stupid mistake.
Sure.
Get it sent. And actually the same with starting, we're sort of starting this YouTube presence and like making videos. First time I tried that, I was unwilling to post because I thought I'm not going to get any views, and sure I didn't at first, we still got a long way to go. But in reality, just getting through that once and like seeing the first screen shoots and getting my first like learnings down was critical. And I think done it. There's no better way than putting it than done was better than perfect here. And it's how I got started. So
it's a good parenting lesson too.
It
for
is.
What it's worth.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. Okay, we're getting real now. We're down to number 2. And this one is pretty famous at Facebook. And in fact, it's not just as a poster, like the number of times the last word on this poster is used at Facebook is kind of wild. Or all 3 words. And that is focus on impact. So take us through it, Josh.
Well, and this was formerly one of the cultural values for a long time. So Facebook does have a set of cultural values. They changed them last year, I think.
Interesting. Okay. I missed that.
And they're now more wordy and less punchy. And anyway, we will save the judgment for another time. But I love Focus on Impact. I love Focus on Impact so much that I have it engraved on my iPad Apple Pencil.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I should have brought it. To me, one of the things about done is better than perfect and engineering is I've been part of engineering teams that really were after the technical side of excellence. And they just pursued that for years.
Yeah.
And this like kind of like architecture on a hill of perfection. And it was really fun. There were like fun aspects. I learned a lot about some deep engineering stuff, and it was great. However, that thing ended up dying after years of work, and effectively it never had any traction. Nobody ever used it. It had effectively no impact in the world.
Yeah.
Like 100 people worked on it, very senior people, very smart. It was like really cool. I would have loved if it existed in the world. I can see lots of use cases for it. But because we were so spun up in like the technical side of things and so far away from actually getting it to people's hands and seeing them actually have positive outcomes from being in their hands, it ended up withering on the vine. Which isn't to say that like sometimes it doesn't work out. It didn't that time. Facebook has made the other mistake, as it were, and gone the other way. Mm-hmm. It says focus on impact. The thing that matters in our culture is getting something out there, getting it to the hands of real people, and then understanding what value it is offering them, finding a way to measure the value that's offered by them, which then feeds back into the whole engineering culture. Like we've talked about experimentation, we've talked about done is better than perfect, we've talked about a bunch of those things. One of the things I loved early on at Facebook was, Mark has these Q&As, and they've kind of over the years moderated as they started leaking and things like that. But early on, they were insanely good.
Yeah.
And he would get up there and just take whatever questions, sometimes weird oddball questions, but mostly deep questions about the business, deep questions about like our culture, and he would take them on. And he would talk like what he thought was like his real thoughts. He was not like particularly hiding them from us.
Yeah.
And one of the things he talked about a lot that I just loved was the notion that data wins arguments. And that, like, from his perspective, getting to a place where you could measure impact meant that you could avoid debating things and having arguments for argument's sake.
Yeah.
And instead, you could say, go run a test.
Yeah.
Like, if you think something works a different way, if you think something is going to, like, be valuable to people, cool. Like, let's try it out.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't break one of the cardinal rules around privacy or a couple other things, as long as it was, like, not in that space, then you generally have relatively free reign. And the final say is, did it have impact? And there's some debatability about what the notion of impact is, because you can measure a million things, like what are the important things to measure. But in general, the culture built itself around a measurable, goal-based culture. And that led to, it was, as long as you could find a way to ladder up to someone's goals, then you could talk about impact in a way that was very not loaded. And that led to a culture that was really big into experimentation, that was really big into making sure that we were not overdoing things, that was very into, sometimes they would trade off technical purity, and sometimes it meant we had to redo things a few times. Like, sometimes we would make mistakes. We talked earlier about move fast and break things. Sometimes in focusing on impact, we would move fast to deliver things that then wouldn't end up scaling, and when lots and lots of people started using them, they'd fall over and we'd have to go fix them. But you know what? Like, the thing I have found in my 25 years of building software is, years ago I had a mentor who said kind of numerous times that, like, you should always plan on re-architecting when a system grows by a couple orders of magnitude. Yeah. And that's like an okay thing to do. Yeah. You have permission to assume that. Don't try to build the Uber system from day zero that can handle, 6 orders of magnitude bigger than, like, you think you're even going to have in a year.
Solves problems you've invented ahead of time.
Yeah. Don't do that. Instead, just assume that you have permission. It's okay to re-architect something when the space changes. Yeah. And if it never changes, then you never had to do the work. And if it does change, you've learned a lot. And now when you do the work, you have a lot more context.
You're going to do it right. Yeah.
So anyway, impact was very ever present.
Let me answer this. So actually, and how it felt to me, I was a PM and you were an engineer. You were engineer cross PM cross data scientist, though actually you kind of did all 3 roles. His title was technically engineering, I think. This to me was very real in terms of, we had a 6-month goal setting cycle. Yep. And if you're setting goals, the discussions there is like, is this measuring impact? It was like at the core. And then even what we would do commonly is when we're prioritizing. So we'd put together, everyone puts together a spreadsheet or some form of a table with the things you think you want to do. And I'd always had a model similar to this, but actually it was VJ, I think, who gave me his formula. Yeah,
so easy.
Which I love that he canonized it. And so that was on each row in the list, you would have your estimate of impact, so some sort of t-shirt score.
Total magnitude.
The magnitude of impact. The probability of impact, which you'd multiply it by, right?
Yeah, because the magnitude of impact is like the good outcome case.
Yep.
But you might not get the good outcome case.
You might be swinging for the fences. It might be a big shot, one-off, whereas this other small win is much more guaranteed. Yep. Which we know is a thing in VJ's mind. And then you divide that multiple by the cost, like how much it takes to engineer it. We use this at Zuplo, used it ever since. It never comes out with the perfect order first time when you do the math, because the t-shirt sizing of impact is a little bit random and nuanced, but wow, does it get me close. And then I start to make adjustments. I'm like, well, why am I adjusting this? And I actually go and fix the inputs and go, well, I think it's because I think the chance of this happening is a little bit higher than I estimated. But it was just part of everything we did when we were planning and thinking about how we were going to ship software there. So, and I think that takes us to the last.
I think so.
The last poster. And joint favorite, I actually loved the ones Josh picked. I had to pick 10 others. I love all of these posters. Forgive me, but we're going to take our tiny, tiny commercial interlude to tell you a little bit about Zuplo before we get to the last poster. Zuplo is your one-stop shop to ship a better API. If you want to deliver a great quality API experience to your API consumers, Zuplo helps you with everything from managing many APIs, from abstracting multiple APIs into a single API endpoint, with authentication translation, changing the shape and form of the API to look more restful and more pleasing to developers using your product. Zuplo is the place to do it. Included, you get a developer portal that looks awesome like this, very much inspired by the likes of Stripe. You get integrated API key management, so your developers can come in and self-serve manage their keys. Maybe they want to change the label to something better, like Facebook poster number 1. Hit save, that's going to change that label. They can roll the key here to get a new key and switch out existing keys. They can even view request logs for their own activity on the API. So you can see here, this particular key has been getting some 200s and some 400s. And here is my history of calls over the last 24 hours. Zuplo's incredibly easy to use. We've had customers go live in under 2 hours from the decision to use an API gateway to accelerate their API program. So you shouldn't miss out either. Give us a try. Let's go and find out what Facebook poster number 1 is. And that is this famous poster. You'll see it on screen much larger. Don't mistake motion for progress. Give us the run through, Josh.
This one I actually stole one of the proper posters, the big ones, from the wall at one point and brought it home. It was around COVID time, and I had I was setting up my home office, and at some point we were allowed to go in and steal stuff, take stuff back from our desks for our house, and I was like, I want that poster at home. This is my favorite poster by far. And, it's interesting because I think that different people can interpret it different ways, but I'll tell you my interpretation, which is tied in with a bunch of the other posters. Like, one of the things that's interesting as an aside is, as we go through these, how intertwined all these posters are, because they are all that cultural ethos, and they're like different little dimensions of the cultural ethos. They are like that one... They're different lenses to see that one culture.
They're reinforcing the same thing.
There's
a lot of overlap. Yeah.
For me, they all reinforce the same thing. And so...
We sound like cult members now,
I know. Well, there is a little bit of that.
It was a little bit cultish, yeah. In a good way.
The cult of Mark. Yeah. But anyway, so don't mistake motion for progress. To me, is that I think it is very easy for teams to get to a place where they feel very busy.
Yeah.
And they're doing lots of things. And, a lot of times when you examine the things that you're doing, they all seem reasonable. Like no reasonable person would say you shouldn't do that thing. Yes, you should do that thing, and you should do this other thing, and you're very busy, and there's a lot of motion and a lot of movement, but then nothing is actually happening. And on the other hand, there are times when you can do almost nothing at all and have huge amounts of actual impact for people. And I think this poster to me is reminding us always to not miss the forest for the trees.
Yep.
And to say, like, hey, you know what? Motion is how we track our day-to-day. Like, we have a tracker and we ask, are we getting this feature done and that feature done? And we ask, we're trying to fix a bunch of bugs before this F8 thing. Is it on track? Whatever. That's all motion.
Yeah.
But the progress is the actual impact. The progress is, all the other things we've talked about. And it is very easy to get caught up in the motion and forget about the fact that, in fact, the product isn't moving forward. And maybe that's because you're doing the wrong motions. Maybe that's because your motions are like the right motions, but they're aimed in the wrong direction. Like, there can be all kinds of reasons for that. But it's just so easy to lose sight of that. And this poster is just remember every day or every week to take stock and ask, are we actually making progress? When we actually think about how we're spending our time, which is like the only zero-sum resource that we have, are we actually spending it on things that are going to result in progress? Like some meaningful outcome for someone in the world. And there's times when those meaningful outcomes were for ourselves. One of the things we instituted at some point was this better engineering culture where we would try to hold back a percentage of our engineering time for kind of whatever folks on the team wanted. It was very, very bottoms up, like how people figured out what they wanted to do. But the idea was to make the code base better because we realized that the mono repo had become kind of a mess. And people would then go do those things. You could say that feels like motion. That's not motion. Like, the progress there was the code base became easier to operate in over time.
Yeah.
And yes, the way we did it, the methodology we used kind of felt a little like motion. Oh, just spend some of your time doing things that you think are good. Another way to think about that is like groupthink, right? Yeah. There's plenty of data suggesting that when people pick stocks, groupthink wins. For something like just make the code base better, you send 1,000 engineers or 10,000 engineers or however many engineers there are now at the code base and make it a little bit better. That's going to be progress.
Yeah.
So
That reminds me of the Dead Code Society T-shirt. So there's
Yes.
actually probably a whole other video on different type of propaganda we could work
T-shirts.
on. But you got a T-shirt for deleting a certain amount of code, or
Yeah, there was a
making the
group.
top
There was a
percentile
group
or
called the
something.
Dead Code Society, and
Yeah.
maybe we're old enough to remember Dead Poet Society.
Yeah.
I don't know if viewers are, but there was a movie, and there was a group, and you would join the group by submitting a post with a diff of over some number of thousand lines of deleted code. And the idea was to reward people, to recognize people for deleting code. The recognition was a T-shirt. So once a quarter, there was someone who ran the group who sent T-shirts out to all the new members of the group. But people would wear those T-shirts around proudly.
Yeah, it was cool.
I'd have one.
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool. I think this poster goes so well with the focus on impact as well. Like, they're very much twins. And for me, it's things like, I sometimes my day starts and I get a little bit absorbed in my dashboards and my reporting and seeing how things are going. And that's important, and I should do it. But then writing new queries. But I think, if I really focused on what's going to help me move the needle and make progress or have impact is, I should probably just go and write documentation. I think it was Miguel de Casa, I think his name was, the guy who founded Mono, who said, when I think about each day, what I can do to have the most impact is I probably should write documentation. But yeah, I think this is a great poster that sort of sums up a lot of the points that we made.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the top 10.
That's the top 10. There's so many posters, though.
So many. So we could probably do another episode and bring in other weird things of Facebook culture, like the ball pits and the... do you remember the ball pit in Seattle in the hot tub?
Do you know the story of that? Anyway, yeah, it's great.
Okay, we'll do it for a different time. But thanks for watching. Hopefully this was useful. Thanks, Josh, for showing up and being an in-person guest. Our first time in Studio Z. Cheers. Let us know in the comments if there's any questions you have about this culture or anything else you'd like to see us come and talk about on Facebook or anything else. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, set up notifications so you get notified when we publish more content like this. We'll be speaking to VJ Raji next. Couple of weeks for that one. Exciting stuff. See you soon.